Evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest of our lockdown lectures with Harif. For those of you who don't know us, Harif is the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. We have a website, www.harif.org, and we also have an associated blog called Point of No Return. To keep up to date with our news and receive regular updates, please do subscribe at the website. We are into, I think, our 25th online event tonight. It's being recorded and you'll find it on YouTube eventually, and it'll be uploaded to the website. It's also being live streamed at the moment to Facebook. After our presentations, you will be very welcome to ask questions. Please do so by typing in your question in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Well, tonight I'm delighted to introduce this event, which is entitled Snapshots of Sephardi Postal History, or Sephardi Treasures, with Nigel Grizzard and Lawrence Julius. They are two avid collectors who will be sharing with us the surprising stories behind their stamps, their envelopes, and other memorabilia. What can these Sephardi treasures tell us about 19th and 20th century Jewish life and commerce in North Africa, the Levant, Egypt, Iraq, and Aden? First off is Nigel Grizzard, who is the Jewish tour guide for Yorkshire. Born in London, he moved north to Leeds many years ago. He has talked and written about Jewish themes, and not just Ashkenazi history, but he knows a great deal about Sephardi history. I can attest to that. And he helps many people explore their heritage in the two great northern cities of Bradford and Leeds. He's now an international stamp dealer. He enjoys traveling and is looking forward to the day when he can start once again visiting Jewish sites worldwide. You're not the only one, Nigel. Lawrence Julius is, of course, my dear husband. He is a trustee of Harif. He's also a trustee of the JNF. He's very active at the local level in Jewish affairs, and he represents Jewish interests in various committees. And I think I've been married to his stamp collection for about 40 years. So anyway, over to you, Nigel. Please do start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Lynn. It's very good. Lawrence, can we have the first slide, please? So this is a picture of effectively the Sephardi world. Maybe we go a bit south in Africa, but it includes Sudan and Yemen and Aden. And this is the world I'm going to talk about tonight. So where does this story start? How do I, as an Ashkenazi, born in London, living in Leeds, come to be involved in the world of Harif? And where do the Sephardi treasures fit in? Well, here in Leeds, I act as the Jewish tour guide in better times, when I can take people round tracing their roots. And although we're perceived as an Ashkenazi community, we actually had a Sephardi synagogue. And there was a small Sephardi community here. It existed from the 1920s to the 1940s. They were mainly for textile merchants, carpet merchants and traders from Turkey and Salonika. And in fact, the 10 Commandments, which grace the Aron of the synagogue, are still to be found in the sanctuary at the Sinai Synagogue in Roman Avenue in Leeds. We have in a community a number of Sephardi Jews who haven't talked much about their past publicly until recently, but my journey that I really got involved with the Sephardi world started in Scarborough, Yorkshire's premier holiday resort. In the late 1970s, we went to visit my wife's friend from university. She'd met a friend at the University of London, and her parents of this lady lived in the town of Scarborough. And I was introduced to Naji and Florette, very good Iraqi names. They were part of the Iraqi diaspora. Florette was from Manchester. She was born as Shamash, a daughter of that Iraqi Jewish community. And to give him his full name, Naji Yehuda Yusuf Ezra Sulman was a Baghdadi Jew who came to Scarborough, and he and his wife ran gift shops on the front. A few years later, Naji's middle daughter got married at Lauderdale Road, London's major Sephardi synagogue, and there we met the whole wider Iraqi community. Now, where do the stamps fit in? I'd been interested in stamps, collecting as a child, selling my collection, starting again, and now I'm a stamp dealer. But when you collect stamps, you've got a very wide choice, so you have to specialize. And as a Jewish collector, I was interested in Jewish things. In Leeds, where I live, there were many Jewish stamp collectors, and I want at this stage pay tribute to a great friend and one of the most well-known collectors in Yorkshire, who was a man called Ronnie Shears. Ronnie and I used to go to Gateshead together. Now, if you live in Leeds, Gateshead means one thing. We didn't go for the yeshiva, but we used to go for the stamp auctions. And I have to tell you that Ronnie would have been in very good company tonight, as his family came from Aleppo to Yorkshire. I started to collect covers, envelopes that relate to the past and show that past world of Sephardi Jewry in communities in and around the Middle East and North Africa. Now, those of you who saw Carol Isaacs last week know she talked about the Jewish world of Baghdad, which she lived in without ever going there. And I think the covers that Lawrence and I will show you tonight give that feel of the vibrant Jewish world and allow you to see it and feel it. None of the covers cost me very much. Many of them turn up in places far away from Jews. How they got there, I don't know. What is important if you are a collector is to have a bit of muzzle, to have a bit of luck, to be in the right place at the right time. And I think I have been. So let's start our journey tonight in the major Greek city and port of Salonika. Can we have the next slide, please? So I was entitled this one, Can I Be Your Agent in Salonika? This postcard was given to me by a friend from America, whose father had found it on eBay. And for those of you who watch Netflix, and I should think a lot of you do, there's a wonderful French series entitled Call My Agent. And this is what the writer of the postcard, Samuel Yaney, wanted to be. Based in Salonika, he wrote in 1897 to Bradford, the wool capital of the world, offering his services as an agent to Lloyd Nephew & Co., who were wool merchants in the great city of Bradford. And what he wrote to them was, Dear Sirs, in view of the very large business that your contractors are doing in our market, and the present situation being exceedingly suitable for dealings, I take the liberty of reminding you again of my offer of services as your agent in this single place. A single trial will convince you. Your transactions in our market will grow. You will admit that our city is a very favourable place for doing very good and certain business, being very important through solvent clients. Now, Salonika had a flourishing Jewish community. It was ravaged by the 1970 fire and then by the Holocaust. And that story alone is a separate talk. But that's the start of my journey. And now we'd like to cross over and go to Turkey. So can we have the next slide, please? This slide focuses on the Manchester Turkish connection. There were many Sephardi Jews who came to Manchester. They came to the city, they founded businesses, they opened synagogues, and their families settled there. Again, it's a subject for a separate talk. But these two covers from Constantinople and Smyrna show that trade. Menashe Cousins was Jewish, and Tanki, who he sends the letter to, may or may not have been. He was certainly a Syrian-born textile merchant living in the northwest of England. He gave an address in Southport when he was naturalised. Some of the Mehan Tankis in Manchester were Jewish, others were not. Again, an area for further research. And the next one is a Victorian cover to a man called Chaim Besso in Manchester from a firm called Vita Eli Argis, Fills and Politti. There's also a link to Vienna on the cover because it may have been rerouted. But there we've gone from Greece to Turkey, and if we move on again in the Levant, we now go to the Lebanon. And this cover is a favourite of mine. I bought it from a stamp auction in Leeds. It's from Beirut to Tiberias, and it comes from the Beth Din in the city of Beirut, the Tribunal Rabbinique de Beirut, as you can see on the right-hand side, the Bet Din HaTzedek. And on the back is a wonderful stamp, the Tribunal Rabbinic Beirut, and the Hebrew. I don't know whether it was about a shala, a religious question that needs an answer, but it touches on that past, that once in Lebanon, there was a thriving Jewish community. So we keep going. If we go on to the next slide, we go on from Lebanon to its neighbor Syria. It's only a short hop. And on the left is a cover from Subi Mizrahi, a Damascus Jew sent to France. And I remember buying that in a stamp shop somewhere near the Gare du Nord in France. There was a street full of stamp shops at the time. And next to it is a cover that's sent to Palestine from Raphael Siegel, who lives in Nachalat Binyamin. And there are the nice Syrian stamps. And it's sent at a time when you could actually send post from Syria to Palestine, not later on from Syria to Israel. But there were Syrian Jews, and that was another community. And it was a community that had links in Israel and a community that had links to New York as well. But there's a huge Syrian community in Flatbush and in Deal in New Jersey. So if we go on, and there we're going on from Baghdad to Haifa. We've had a lot to talk about in Baghdad, and this is one on the back. It says Salim Meir from Bataween in Baghdad, from the Jewish quarter. And next to it, there's another lovely one. It says by overland mail, not necessarily a Jewish cover, but the mail was taken from Baghdad to Haifa and then airmailed to England. So a bit about Iraq, and I think Lawrence might say one or two things about Iraq later on. Going on, we've stopped off in Aden, and we've heard a lot about Aden pronounced in these lectures. The British call it Aden. I'm told you speak Arabic, it's really pronounced Aden. But Aden was a great place to stop, to shop. If you were on a cruise going to the east or a ship, it was one of those great places. And there you see the cover I bought for a few pennies from Yaakov Shmuel Israel Tov, who was in the Dana Bazaar. The Jews in Aden ran shops, they were traders. And can we go to the next slide? There we see a picture of Crater. That was the place where the Jews lived. You hear a lot about Crater. I wonder why it was called Crater. And then a friend who'd spent a year there during World War II told me, very simple for being called Crater. It was the crater of a volcano. When we talk about Aden, I remember Abram Marx. I met Abram Marx in my first, I worked as a researcher for the Board of Deputies. In fact, I've been there in school in Aden. He left Aden in 1965 to become chief executive of the Board of Deputies, but he returned in May 1967 to rescue the remnant of the Jewish community in the colony and to get them out, to get them to Israel and London. So the covers that we've had, you know, show a bit about life in Aden. We go from Aden, we can go on now, from Aden to Iran. And this is a cover from the late 1940s. It's sent to Mr. Suleiman Arustad. And I knew many Iranian Jews from university, and they told me life was good under the Shah, but it was important to have friends and family in the US. And the friends that I had from Queen Mary College, which then was a college, but now is a university, have moved on. And they've left Tehran, and they're living a life in Los Angeles, one's in the Valley in California, and the other's in Santa Monica. So this is an early one, written in Iranian to Mr. Suleiman Arustad, who was an Iranian Jew in New York in the 1940s. And if we go on to the next slide, we've gone on and we moved from Iran to Egypt. And these are two interesting covers I found. One is from a business called Aden Samuel Israel, and it was interesting they had the name Israel. And the other was from Dino Yehuda Nahum. If you see at the top, he writes his name, Dino Yehuda Nahum Kahir, Dino Yehuda Nahum of Cairo. And that in this cover, which comes from the time of King Farouk, is from the 1930s. And, you know, he obviously felt confident that he could put on his covers Hebrew names. And Egypt had a large Jewish community, as we know, and it traded with the UK, as both of those covers do. Now, if we go on to the next one, We know that there were large and small enterprises, and this covers from the bank Zilka. And I said banking facilities required and hopefully a loan. The bank Zilka was founded in Beirut in 1946. And again, the whole Zilka family, their links with Mothercare, the firm that was founded by the Zilkas in Britain, again, is worthy of a talk. But this cover is from to Ellen's Bank in Palestine, and it comes from the bank Zilka, a Sephardi bank in Egypt, or a Sephardi Middle Eastern bank. So you can see that as well as there being Ashkenazi bankers like the Rothschilds, there were also Sephardi bankers like the Zilkas. If we go on, we'll see two covers. The first one is from Vittorio Di Nahum, and he comes from Tripoli in Libya. And for those of you who've been to early lectures, you'll know that the person called Lucky Nahum, who lectured about his family in Tripoli, and we think that's a relative. And the other one is one sent to Vienna from Elia Fargon, who was a Jewish guy in Benghazi. So I have two friends whose family came from Libya to Israel, Shalom and Herzl in Leeds. Their families both left Libya for Netanya. And we've had lots of talks over the years about what it would like to go back to Libya. Now, a few years ago, I'd been in the airport at Tunis, and I was flying back to London, but there were flights there, direct short flights to Benghazi and Tripoli. And I have to tell you, I was very tempted at the time to go. I've also been to Tunisia. I said I'd been in Tunisia, and if we can go on to the next one, please. These two covers are from Algeria and Tunisia. One is from Joseph Hyatt in Tunisia. I've been in Tunisia to visit Tunis City Carrier, the Tunisian Tourist Board. They then took us to El Griba, to the great Lag BaOmer celebrations in Djerba, which you have to go to, which was an amazing thing. And I can still remember being in a room at the casino in Djerba, full of French Jews, Tunisians and Israelis, with food, conversation and great friendship, as the Jews were welcomed back. And you could see the bond as French and Israeli Jews spoke Arabic to their Tunisian hosts. And on the right, we have a cover, which is sent to a lady called Madame Rosenfeld. It's sent from Hanoi in Vietnam, and it's sent to Algiers, which then was a province of southern France, is now the state of Algeria. If we can move on, we go from Algeria to Morocco. And I remember going to Tangier in the 1970s. It was wonderful. There was a huge beach. There was great sand. The currency was in dirhams. I'd been over on the ferry from Gibraltar, and I was told that the Reef Hotel, from which that cover came, was one of the best hotels in Tangier and was Jewish owned. And while we've had this lecture, we've talked a bit about Jews who lived in Tangier during wartime, who were there as refugees. And this cover where it says Examiner 1654, that was to a British censor, and it was sent by a Jew called Grunwald to someone who was Jewish in London Northwest 11 to Golders Green. And finally, if we can look from my slides, I wanted to say that not everyone was Sephardi. And we found two final covers. One was sent to Monsieur Gilbert Bernheim, who was in Algiers. And I had a friend called school whose name was David Bernheim, and I said, was this your family? And he's still trekking. And the other was to from S. Rothenberg of Cairo, certainly not a Sephardi name, definitely an Ashkenazi name, sent to Jack Hardy & Co. in London W1. So there you can see a whole selection of covers of Jewish interest. I haven't got any from the Sudan or the Yemen. I'd love someone to send me some. The Yemen one, I think you'd have to translate the Arabic, because I don't think that they would have had their name on in English in the way that many of the others did. Maybe they had their name on in Hebrew, but I haven't seen anything. But that's my trip, and now I'll hand over to Lawrence.
Hi, good evening. Well, my collection of sort of Sephardi stamps started unusually. I went to an exhibition with Lynn, and there we saw an envelope sent by Lynn's grandfather from Baghdad to Tehran in about the 1920s. And it was the princely sum of £1. So I think I had to get it. My collection now has hundreds of items, not just envelopes, a whole load of memorabilia, cigarette labels, postcards, maps, etc. And I'm showing a small selection tonight. When Lynn wrote Uprooted, the material I collected became a natural source of material to illustrate aspects of the book, particularly the colonial era. It illustrates life from the Mellah to sort of high society, and it shows how the Jews lived in relative poverty in the Mellah to high society in Baghdad and in Egypt. This is the first envelope, and as you can see, Ezra M. Bekor, Baghdad, Turkey to Asia, and it's sent to someone who'd been to Mecca. If you look on the envelope, it says Hajj Ali Akbar Kashan and Brothers. And you can see I paid it precisely £1 for it. And that was a very expensive pound. It's cost me a lot more to get the rest of them. I thought I'd only find one cover for Lynn's family. And the next thing I knew, wherever you looked, you found it. Either the Heskel Hayim family, which was my mother-in-law's, or the Bekor family. And the other thing, which I'll talk about a bit later, and if Freddie Kalachi is on the call, he might want to say some few things. I was fascinated by those stamps in the middle. Iraq in British occupation, all the envelopes had 6 or 9 stamps on them, and a fascinating stamp. And the other thing is the overprints on no 2 envelopes look the same. They're either grayer or blacker or things that are missing or whatever. So that's also quite fascinating. Let's, like Nigel, let's move to Salonika. Let's go around a bit. And the first thing is this cover sent in the 1850s from the Modiano family, which were the leading family in Salonika, Jewish family, and it was sent to France. And it was, in fact, goes through the French post office. Now, those of you who go to Holland Park Synagogue know that the synagogue was founded by people from Salonika and from Istanbul. There was to celebrate the Entente Cordiale in 1908, there was a big exhibition at White City and the Olympics at Olympia. And it was like a world fair and an expo. And a lot of the Turkish businessmen, particularly if they're in the cigarette business or the carpet business, came over. And it wasn't just the managers came over, they brought their workforce. There you can see a stamp for the exhibition in 1908, a special kind of souvenir. And then we go to Holland Park Synagogue, and on the plate of the founders, you can see the first president was Mr. Modiano. Next, let's go to Constantinople. We've all heard of the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds were the bankers of Europe, of Western Europe. There was a family in Constantinople called Camondo. They were the Rothschilds of the East. And here we have a letter sent in 1854 from Isaac Camondo in Constantinople to the Frère Rothschilds in Paris. The Camondo family later moved to Paris, and was it Moïse Camondo was a very big benefactor. He gave his house to the French government when he bequeathed it to the French government when he died. Unfortunately, he had 2 children, a son, Nissim, who was an Air Force ace who died in World War I. He was shot down over Lorraine, and a daughter who was sent to Auschwitz with her 2 children during the Second World War. Please, Lynn, if you ever go to Paris, there's the house on Parc Monceau. It's well worth visiting, full of amazing artifacts, and the park's very nice too. Next, let's have a look at the British. We have this lovely envelope from, I think, the 30s, which shows British trade in the Middle East. What I really like about this, if you look at the flags, it's got the flags of all the countries around the side. If you look at the left-hand corner, you'll see a flag of Palestine with the regular Star of David in blue sitting on that flag of Palestine. But before you get too excited, if you look on the right-hand corner, there is Palestine, also in blue and white and written in Arabic. Very topically, on the back of the envelope, it's got a message for Brexit, and it's probably as important a message then. The Middle East is one of the most important consuming centers of the world. Did you capitalize on its pent-up buying potential? So shall we move on to the British? In 1917, the British occupied Baghdad. They were fighting the Ottomans. They wanted to preserve their oil interests in Mosul and their oil interests in Iran during the First World War. When they invaded Baghdad, they thought we need to have some stamps. And they thought, what better way of saying we have got stamps and showing we're in control than to take the stamps of the Ottomans and stamp over them saying British Baghdad or Iraq under British occupation. Stamps were issued in Baghdad with Baghdad under British occupation for about 17 days. And there are a lot of forgeries of those stamps. If you look at the stamps on the top right-hand corner, you can see it's got Baghdad and it's got like a crescent in there. That one is in fact genuine. And it's rather interesting. The bit in Arabic says, tax for the relief of the children of martyrs. So the British quickly spotted it said that and didn't think it was appropriate. And you look lower down on that block of stamps, you can see that the inscription in that crescent has been overprinted again, so that wording is no longer visible. Stamps were scarce. At times they ran out of stamps and cut them in two to cover the postage. So you've got a stamp there bisected in two, used by the British. And on the left, you have just something I thought was a bit of fun from 1917, a Christmas card showing a British soldier at the Citadel in Baghdad. Sorry, wrong way. The British soldiers, when they were abroad, would send a postcard home to tell their families that they were alive and well. And they really weren't allowed to put very much information for it. There were a lot of Indian soldiers stationed in Iraq, and they printed special cards in Urdu for them to send home. So the front of the card would be the same as a card a British soldier would have sent back to England, but the back of the card has it in Urdu. The next thing I was going to talk about is, I don't know if you can see this, this was one of the main arteries, the trading arteries of the British Empire. It was a trade route from England to Australia, stopping off all down from Gibraltar, Port Said, Suez, Aden, Mumbai, Colombo, Singapore, Australia, and Malacca as well. And it was kind of the lifeblood for trade and for moving people around the empire. And the first cover I've got is an envelope sent from London to Mr. Ben Susan in Cadiz, telling him, a freight circular, telling him when all the boats are going to sail. And if you look at this, is from the Orient Line. They produce lovely maps once a year. And on the back of the map, I don't know if you can see this, you have a calendar with all the freight, all the times when the boats are going to travel. So you can see when the boat was going to be in which port at which time. Next stop on the next stop is Port Said, and the Jews were very, very big in the tobacco industry. And I illustrated it with, there's a man called Simon Arts. No one knows where he came from. There were rumors he was American, or was he Polish, or was he from the Balkans, or was he from the Caucasus? No one really knows, but he established a tobacco factory and it became the Egyptian cigarette manufactory in Port Said. And if you look at that envelope on the top of the right, a stamp in purple, which says he is the manager. We have a picture of a cigarette label from a cigarette box, a postcard of his factory, the cigarette stamp, which shows the pyramids of the Sphinx, and a letter with a lovely postmark, which says Simon Arts, Port Said. Be quite nice to have a postmark with your name on it. Sorry. Next, we go down to Suez. The Jews were great traders. Lots of the families set up places in different countries. So, like the Sassoons were all over East Asia. The Dangours were a very influential family, as were the Zilkas. And this letter is from the Dangours in Basra, sent to the Dangours in Suez. And it just shows how the Jews were involved in trade in the area and how the family connections worked. Next, let's go to Aden, which Nigel has spoken about, where the boats used to, there was a big Jewish community in Aden, and the boats used to come to Steamer Point, and everyone used to get off the boat and buy their wares from the various shops. And we have a letter from Del Borgo and from Aharomi from Steamer Point. But Aden wasn't just full of Sephardis, there were Ashkenazis there. The envelope on the bottom on the left it says George Kaufman in brackets London Limited. Who was George Kaufman? What was an Ashkenazi doing in Aden? Well, George Kaufman was a doctor from Germany. When he fled Germany, because he couldn't practice as a doctor, he went to Switzerland. The Swiss didn't want him practicing as a doctor, so the story goes he goes to London. There weren't any jobs for him in London, but they knew there was a job in Aden. So he went to Aden and worked there as a doctor and established a very respected practice. And the story we've heard says he was also a doctor for Haile Selassie in Ethiopia. And as we further go down the route, we go to Mumbai. This letter I find fascinating. It was sent during the war when lots of Jews from Iraq went to live in India. These included my mother-in-law, who went from Baghdad first to Mumbai and then to Pune. This one is fascinating. It was sent during the war from Heskel Sassoon Somech in Basra. It's been opened by the censor and it's written in Hebrew. And one question I was wondering, which I still don't know the answer to, is was the censor a good linguist? Was he able to read the Hebrew? Right. As Nigel mentioned, the Jews were very big in finance. Part of it was the usury laws that other religions weren't allowed to do finance. And here is a probably anti-Semitic postcard from Morocco showing a Jewish money changer. If we move to Baghdad, and you saw Nigel showed earlier things from the Zilka Bank in Egypt. In Baghdad, the Zilka Bank was even more prominent, and his address was Maison de Banque. So if you sent a letter to Baghdad, Maison de Banque, that went straight to the Zilkas. The envelope at the top right illustrates the business coming, it's a censored cover from during the Second World War, and it shows the business coming from Palestine to Iraq, showing how the trade was going. The Jews of Egypt were also prominent bankers. There was Bank Zilka and there was Bank Mosseri. And Bank Mosseri, well, it was quite interesting, or this check is, because it was for the Palestine Hotels Limited. And the Palestine Hotels Limited was a group of hotels which included the King David Hotel, which they built in the 1930s. When the Jews were kicked out of Egypt, the Egyptian government sequestrated their property. And amongst the things they took were shares in Palestine hotels. And quite recently, they tried to sue in Israel for the value, for I think $1.3 million, for the value of 1,000 shares in Palestine hotels, which had been owned by Kaduri Zilka, which they had sequestrated from the family when they left Egypt. Not surprisingly, they didn't win the case, but it's an interesting piece of history. And Bank Mosseri was an influential bank and became part of the Central Bank of Egypt. Right. Within North Africa, a lot of the Jews lived in mellas. They were often walled quarters, there were Jewish areas. And if you look, I've circled on this map of Iran where the mellah was. And it says that Kotier is Israelite. And the Jews lived in their little quarter, often near the Sultan's palace. I've got pictures of mellas. Some of them you can see look like prosperous. The one in Fez on the left with very nice balconies, wide streets, narrower streets elsewhere. Meknes looks very, very wide and very grand. But others were very poor. Some of the people were very poor. And these are just a few pictures of life in the mellah. Life in North Africa could also be tough. Pogroms were not unique to the West. They also happened in the East. In Fez in 1912, there was a big riot, pogrom. 42 Jews were killed. It took something like 1,500 French troops and 5,000 Moroccan troops to quell the riots. There was massive damage to the mellah, and the Jews ran for the protection of the Sultan. And here are the Jews queuing up outside the Sultan's palace seeking his protection. The Sultan kindly obliged, and he had a zoo. So what did he do? he put the Jews in cages like the animals. So you have in this picture, on the left-hand side, you have the tigers in the cage, and on the right-hand side, you have the Jews. Right, now, this is a secret of beauty. If you go in North Africa, early 20th century, all the photographs you see, or most of the photographs you see, are very well-built, well-proportioned, voluptuous Jewish women. The Muslims didn't want their women pictured. And if a woman was big, it was a sign of wealth, that the family had the money to feed them. Sort of, if you were a slim woman, you weren't attractive. You had to be big and have plenty to do it. And there was a secret to this. We actually found this lovely advert for a product called La Helba, which is the secret of the Tunisian Jews to have a perfect bust. Now, the good news, if anyone wants it today, is we've done our research and the product is still available on eBay France. As you can see, €15.90, you can buy Helba today. The Jews were very big in the tobacco industry. I showed you Simon Arts before. There were other company names like Chinazi, Rejouan. And these are two letters censored from Sulman Rejouan in Baghdad to Egypt for cigarette paper, but they'd also order the tobacco. And then you have a cigarette tax stamp for Egyptian customs for Abdullah Rejouan, Cairo, for his cigarette packet. So the envelopes and the cigarette tax all fit together. The Jews of Egypt were very, very philanthropic, and they took pity on the Jews of Eastern Europe. And here we have an appeal from 1932 going around the Jewish community in Egypt to raise money for Ort, which when I found this, I was rather amused. In fact, I bought the envelope, not realizing the letter was inside it. And it was a very nice find. Here we have a donation from the Jewish Welfare Fund, with a revenue stamp on from Egypt. The Welfare Fund of the community in Cairo received 200 piastres from Zach Levy. Very generous, Mr. Levy. If you want to give money to Holland Park today, we won't say no. There was also a great cafe society. The Jews were very much part of it. In Egypt, in Cairo, there's a cafe called Gropi, where all the Jews used to go and eat and drink. Unfortunately, I don't have a letter from it. I have a menu which is now in the Egyptian Museum in Tel Aviv, but I do have a lovely map, and half of the adverts on the map are from Jewish businesses. Chemler was a Jewish department store, and they're advertising on the cover of the map. But there are lots of other Jewish businesses there. We were talking about Tripoli before. There were two Tripolis. There's Tripoli in North Africa, and there's a lovely, lovely letter from Albert Levy from Tripoli, and there's another letter from a Jewish family in Tripoli of Lebanon. In 1945, there was a pogrom in Tripoli, and half the press reported the pogrom having been in Lebanon, when in fact it was in Libya. Now getting back to the roots of Lynn's book, here is a cover sent from Britain to Baghdad in 1955 to Murad Gubay. Unfortunately, Murad Gubay had had to say goodbye to Baghdad and had been uprooted. And that is just an example. Finish off with a couple of interesting things. When the British in 1926 wanted new stamps for Palestine, they wanted things which showed nice buildings, they commissioned a Zionist artist called Belor Cantor. Mr. Cantor, very, very cleverly, he put Palestine in English, he put Palestine in Arabic, but when he put it in Hebrew, you can see I put in red, he put Palestine in Hebrew, but added an Aleph and a Yod. He did it on the stamps, he did it on the cards, and the Aleph Yod stood for Eretz Yisrael, and it was, he put that on in the design. I've got lots more items in my collection. The top one at the top left, you can't see it, is to the Dweck family of Aleppo. There's an envelope to Halfon, which is Robert Halfon, the Jewish MP. Lots and lots of other examples from all over the Middle East, all at different times. but this was really just a quick smattering today. And I will just finish with a Matchbox label. I came across a load of Matchbox labels, which from sort of around 1918, 1920, which there was a Jewish man in Sweden who ran this business, and he printed publicity matchboxes for lots of people. I'm not sure what part of Lynn's family this Becker and Benjamin is, but when I came across this with the Canon on a little matchbox, Becker and Benjamin, London, I had to get a copy of it. That is where I'm going to finish. Thank you.
Okay.
Right, Lynn will now read the questions. So come here, darling.
All right. So we've had a query from Sarah here, Sarah Manasseh. She wonders whether the letter to Bombay from Baghdad, was that written in Rashi script rather than the square Hebrew print letters, and presumably would have been in Judeo-Arabic. Would you know that?
I only have the envelope.
Don't ask an Ashkenazi.
we do have a couple of letters which we think is in Farsi, Judeo-Farsi, don't we then?
Yeah. If you can't understand it, then it must be in Farsi. Then Danielle says, Danielle, who's actually from Tunisia, comments that young girls were force-fed as men liked fat women. So lots of helba consumed in Tunisia. And she says many girls died from obesity. And of course, in Tunis, the Jewish quarter is called the Hara. Yes, not the Mela. You're quite right. So Gilda says she can tell if it was Farsi, the language. We've got all sorts on the call. We've got people who are fluent in Judeo-Arabic, in Farsi, in Hebrew, everything. Right. Are there any other questions?
The thing which fascinated me most is the way that Nigel's collection and my collection, we almost did the same thing. We almost duplicated each other. We both started with Salonika and Constantinople. We did the banking, we did the trade routes, and almost duplicate each other.
The thing I was amazed at that. And the other thing about it is just how these covers turn up. Normally I find them when I'm far away, thinking far away from anything Jewish, and you go in a stamp shop, there are still a few around. You ask them if they've got any covers, and you just walk through them and you find these amazing things that no one else realizes are of Jewish interest or relate to that past. But I'm sure in the same way I sell other covers from other parts of the world, and other collectors look at them and say, this guy doesn't know what he's selling. It's very important militarily or some other ethno-religious grouping. The other thing is I see someone mentioned about Mr. Guji Salman. He was Naji Salman's brother, and there were a number of Salmans who lived in Scarborough, and I think there's still one or two there.
Right, are there any? Danielle says rather than Rashi script, it might have been Malak.
I'll see if I can find it.
He's just going to go and find it. What's that, Emil? What you were? You're not being excluded. You make the point that there were Sephardis in Bulgaria, but I don't think we've got any covers from Bulgaria, do we, Nigel?
No, we haven't. Well, I'll have to go. Still got thousands of them to sort through. So I will look through, and if we find any, we can email some to. Can email some.
Right. And you make the point there were Sephardis in Italy. And of course, Italy is a bit of a special case because it's neither Ashkenazi nor Sephardi. I mean, the community goes back to Roman times. So I would quibble with you over that, Emil.
But the thing I'd ask people is if their parents have old letters that they still have envelopes, you know, it will be good to photograph them and email them to you. You know, there are these things lying around in people's drawers. And often, unfortunately, when people pass away, they get chucked out. But if you've got them, we'd love to see, just photograph the envelope and send it to us.
Right. And Paul Fenton adds that many Jews were actually active in the postal services, for instance, in Morocco, and as producers of postcards in North Africa. I wonder if that's what accounts for the fact that so many Jews appear on these postcards, especially Jewish women. I mean, we thought it was because the Muslim women objected to being photographed, but maybe it was just because it was a sort of Jewish trade. And Sarah makes the point that there are a couple of first day covers of the Sassoon synagogues in Bombay and Pune, India. In her mother's book, Rachel Menashe's book, Baghdadian Jews of Bombay. Thank you very much for pointing that out, Sarah. Paul, we can let you comment on this question of Jews in the Postal Service. It's just that I have to unmute you and hang on one sec. Can we unmute Paul Fenton?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't find that envelope. Paul, you should be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now.
First of all, thank you very much for this most interesting conference on such a topical subject. How gratifying it is to find other fellow Judaica postal collectors. Just two observations. First of all, the amazing importance of these postcards and covers, especially commercial covers, for the history of the Jews in Islamic lands. There will come a day, if it isn't already here, where when all Jewish presence in North Africa or the Islamic East will be denied. And here we have these covers which exhibit and demonstrate not only a huge Jewish presence in those countries, but also the very dense activity deployed by Jews of Islamic lands and their contribution to local industry and commerce. That's one point. The second point is that in two places in the world, as far as I know, there might be others, Jews were the pioneers of the postal system. One is in the local posts in Morocco, where you had Jews very early on having their own postal services after, second only to the Sultanic Central Post Service, up until 1912, when it was replaced by the French postal system and Spanish and British with what concerns Tangiers. But you can find in many envelopes which are bi or trilingual, where you have an address both in Arabic, in French, and in Judeo-Arabic, the latter destined for the local Jewish postal masters, and indeed the postman who delivered the letters, who could only read Hebrew. The other place is in Iran. In fact, I noticed on the display, the last display of your letters at the end, that you have an envelope in Persian, in Arabic script from Iran, and on the top there's a Hebrew address, or rather Judeo-Persian address, which was probably intended for the Jewish postman who distributed these items in Hara, in the Jewish quarter, or the Mahalla, as it was known in Tehran and other countries. And lastly, also the pioneering role of Jewish photographers in both North Africa and Aden, which came up a number of times. The Ibn Ghaith family in Aden were photographers and produced many postcards. The same phenomenon is also widespread in North Africa. For example, the Nidam, the Levi, the Bouhsira families were all photographers who then became who then branched out into photographs on postcards. And indeed, since Jewish women were the only females in North Africa who allowed themselves to be photographed, preferentially by a Jewish photographer. So indeed, the two are connected.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. That was Professor Paul Fenton of the Sorbonne. And this is what I love about these lockdown lectures. There's always someone who has, has inside knowledge about the subject and who can contribute to it. So thank you very much for that.
But that envelope you were talking about with the address in Hebrew and in Arabic had the letter inside in Hebrew.
Right.
One of the few which we have the letters.
Are there any more questions? So yes, Emile, the talk shows how stamps can produce such evidence to historical matters. Absolutely. So no amount of denial can deny history. Yeah, and is Freddie?
Is Freddie on the call?
Freddie on the call? Freddie Klaschi? Are you there?
Is Fred on the call? Is that Freddie Kalachi? Can you raise your hand if you're Freddie Kalachi, Fred?
Sorry.
Oh, there's Fred. Yes, it is. Right, Fred, right. Fred will let you speak. You can say much more about the...
Yeah, Fred is a real expert
on the Jews, on the stamps of Iraq, and particularly the overprints. Knows much more than I ever will.
No, it was very interesting. Thanks for this presentation. Regarding the stamps of Iraq that you showed, they are actually very rare, especially the Baghdad ones, because they were only in use for 17 days. And at the time, King George V was very interested in these stamps, and he sent a letter, a telegram, requesting, to be sent these stamps. I have a copy of this telegram, actually.
Oh, wow.
Would you be able to check the ones I've got? I think I have one genuine one, and the rest I think were forgeries, because I challenged it as forgeries, and the guy gave me my money back.
Yeah, they are forgeries.
But one I think is genuine. But would you be able to attest if they're genuine or forgery? Or you?
I can, yeah. Actually, I get sent these stamps to the Royal Philatelic Society, and I have to tell them whether they're genuine or forgeries.
Well, can I persuade you to say they're all genuine? Then I can sell them for a lot of money.
Can you add something more about the stamps of Iraq that you've collected?
Well, you said you were intrigued to see the stamps in 9s or in 6s on the envelope. Well, that was because of the postal rate.
Yeah.
You had registration at 3 annas or 4 annas, depending on what time of which year it was, and the rest was postage. So it usually came to 6 annas or 9 annas.
But they did. What I was trying to make was they never had the right denominations. You go in the post office and they'll give you a first-class stamp or a second-class stamp. But lots of envelopes are full of 1 anna stamps. We had the other one where a higher value stamp got bisected into 2 because they didn't have the low value stamps.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Although these bisected ones actually were not authorized. They were more for philatelists. So you couldn't use them on envelopes. They were just done for philatelists.
Oh, right. It's got a field post office stamp on it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, basically, you could go to the post office and request anything done. If you paid them, you could get anything done.
So half a stamp was worth half the value, was it?
Theoretically, yes, but that was done just as a curiosity rather than it was actually used in the post.
Oh, wow, how fascinating.
Mm.
That's great.
But very interesting how you found all these covers and the stories to go with them.
Well, my favorite Iraqi thing is that Christmas card from 1917.
Yeah, yes.
But I have another Iraqi story that you were mentioning about people going to the post office. I have also a large number of Falkland stamp covers from the Falkland Island dependencies. And there didn't seem to be a address on them. And then I looked and they were sent to a Mr. Bashi in Port Stanley. And he actually was an Iraqi Jew from Manchester living in London. And because I found another one sent to his office in the Strand. So, you know, people were up to all sorts of things to get their Falkland Island stamps done. And I thought at first I found an Iraqi Jew living in the Falklands. But I think he was just, they were just sent to Port Stanley and then someone air freighted them on to London.
Someone's asked where we discovered the things. I think quite a few on eBay, quite a few in odd places. And I think on eBay, the thing to do is don't look in the obvious places. I found someone selling a lot of junk, or two people selling a lot of junk in Egypt. And a lot of the Egypt stuff has not come from a normal, like a flea market or a junk person in Egypt who's got a load of this and that and everything, who doesn't really know what they're selling. Because I think, as Nigel will say, the second something says it's got Judaica in it or something, they add 3 noughts to the price, and it's not what I want to pay. I think yours is the same experience, isn't it, Nigel?
Yes, it is. Anything with Judaica is very expensive. If you just say to them, have you got any envelopes? And you just look through them. Certainly in Eastern Europe, you can find lots of them from Jewish firms. And the same way as if you find someone who's got covers that come from North Africa. There used to be a stamp shop in King George Street in Israel that had a tremendous amount of stuff because all of the Jews were writing to relatives and through business into Palestine. And that's where I found a lot of very interesting things.
Well, in the flea market in Tel Aviv, we got hold of, in fact, 2 and then a third laissez-passer for when people left Iraq. And these things you don't see anywhere, and you would think they'd be quite expensive, but they about $40 each or something, which I think for the piece of history they were, I don't think that was expensive.
Now, what advice would you have for Selina? Because she's got a box from Baghdad, but although there are no addresses, she's found a couple of boxes with stamps and one with photo negatives, but no date. I mean, where does she begin to try and identify these things?
Sends it to you, Lawrence.
Or to Freddie.
Yeah, you go to Freddie, that is the answer.
Well,
The other serious option is have an individual Zoom call with someone, and you can then show them on the screen. That's an easy way to do it.
Great.
Yeah, I'm glad to help.
Yeah.
We can put you in touch with Freddie Glasschi.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely wonderful. Well, if there are no more questions,
I was just going to say, if everyone should go onto the internet and look at the latest edition of The Scribe, which has been the first edition for about 20 years. And Freddie has written a fascinating story about those first stamps of Iraq, and it's well worth reading.
Yeah.
It reads like a novel, not like a philatelic article.
So one last question. The Palestine stamps with the Star of David on them. Gilda asks, how can we leverage that and where?
That cover was a British trade cover which had 2 flags on it, a Star of David on the left and Palestine in Arabic on the right. But it just shows that the Star of David on Palestine was used in common usage at that time in the 1930s.
Again, one in the eye for the deniers.
I just love that. Yeah. I love Yod. I think that's just lovely in the design.
Okay, well, I think we've come to the end of the questions, so I will wrap up there. So I'd just like to thank Nigel for a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. And thank you, Lawrence, for all your hard work. It was absolutely fascinating, and thank you all for joining us. Next week, we go to Shanghai when Dr. Maisie Meyer will be taking us on the Shanghai Express and telling us about the intrepid Baghdadi merchants who helped make Shanghai such a financial center. And we've got several more lectures planned after that. So if you like what you've seen and you'd like to make a donation, that would be very much appreciated. In the meantime, I wish you a very good evening or good afternoon.
Paul
if you're in the
Fenton wants to
States.
share us one more anecdote. So Paul, Paul, if you're still there, I will unmute you now.
Right. Okay.
Right, you've been unmuted, Paul.
Paul, are you still there?
Thank you, Matt. Are you receiving me?
Yes, yes, Roger.
Okay. This is an interesting observation on the stamp you showed of the Palestine series that was issued by the British government, and on which we see Palestine in three different languages: English, Arabic, and Hebrew, with the addition in parentheses of Aleph Yud, Eretz Israel. Now, I believe this must have been about 5 years ago, when the Palestinian Authority wanted to assert itself. It brought out a series of dinars from in currency as an example of what would be the currency of the future Palestine, and also in order to connect and underline that there had really been a Palestine in the past, they issued a series of postal stamps upon which they reissued replicas of the British series of Palestine stamps. And of course, on these stamps, they admitted, because through ignorance, that Palestine equals Eretz Israel.
That's a terrific,
lovely story.
Terrific story. Thank you very much, Paul Fenton.
Okay.
And Gilda, yes, you must watch next week's lecture. Maisie will be talking about the Hardoon family, and I'm sure it'll be absolutely fascinating. So it remains to me to just wish you a very good evening. Happy New Year, stay safe and stay well, and see you next time. Thank you very much.
Everyone,
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good night.
Bye.
Interesting evening. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Lawrence, thank you very
On mute.
much.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.